The circle has been cast. Now let's begin. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Spectral Circle. My name is Mike, and before we begin this episode, I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who listened to and downloaded the very first episode of the Spectral Circle. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you continue to listen and enjoy this podcast. Please share it with a friend or a family member, as they may like this podcast too. Also, if you listen via iTunes, please go and give me a review and some stars. Some criticism would be nice. If you listen via YouTube, please like, share and subscribe to the Spectral Circle podcast channel. And we are now available on Stitcher Radio as well. So if you just type in the Spectral Circle podcast, you will find it on Stitcher Radio. And if you use Twitter, just type in @SpectralCircle and you will find me on there. So if you want to keep up to date with all the news going on with the Spectral Circle podcast, it's all on Twitter, @SpectralCircle. This episode may be a shorter episode, just like the first one, because we've not received any emails or voicemails just yet. It's early days, we need to build an audience, so without further ado, let's get into what today's episode is all about. The topic for this episode is the Black Monk of Pontefract, which is a poltergeist/haunting case here in the United Kingdom, which is pretty famous worldwide, and Shadowbeings, or Shadow People, or Shadow Men, whatever you want to call them. And I will share a personal experience again, which I had in my early 20s, and that will be at the end of the story of the Black Monk of Pontefract. So without any further hesitation, let's go. I'd say this haunting or poltergeist case is one of the most well known here in the United Kingdom, and it's pretty well known across the world. There is also a movie covering the events of this case. The movie is called When the Lights Go Out. Now, I have not seen this movie yet, but I am definitely going to purchase it and watch it for myself, because I also collect horror movies, and this is straight up my alley. It's covering the history and the reoccurring hauntings of the Black Monk of Pontefract case. So let's go back to August of 1966 in East Yorkshire on the Chequersfields housing estate, where Jean and Joe Pritchard, their son Philip, aged 15, and daughter Diane, aged 12, lived in a house that stood on the corner on the top of a hill, 30 East Drive. This house was located close to the old town gallows, where people were sentenced to hang until dead, back in the 15th and 16th century. Now, to me, the gallows is the English equivalent of the Native American Indian burial grounds, you know. Wherever the gallows is focused or centered in a community, like a town or a village, and you have people living around it, you often get these hauntings and poltergeist activity. So it's like a melting pot, a gumbo of activity that occurs and continues to happen for years, decades and centuries after the initial gallows has been taken down. The remnants of the death has kind of soaked into the ground and will always remain a part of that background and community. So let's get back to this case. There was a bank holiday weekend in August 1966, and Jean and Joe Pritchard decided to go away on a short break, leaving the children at 30 East Drive with their grandmother, Sarah Scholes. Now, Sarah Scholes is where this activity kind of centres around until a later date. She is the first key witness of something happening, and then the encounters get worse and worse and worse. But you will hear that as I go along with the story. So this is where the beginning of the activity starts. Sarah Scholl is left on her own. The kids are out playing, doing what kids do, and she feels a cold gust of air just rush through the house, straight through her, through the house. And she finds this very weird, very strange, because outside it's hot. It's a beautiful hot summer's day, and there shouldn't be no cold air. There shouldn't be no draft coming through the house. Then Philip, the 15-year-old boy, he comes back into the house after playing with his mates or whatever, and he walks into the living room and notices a weird white substance emerging in the middle of the room, not from the ceiling, but in the middle of the room, and slowly falling onto the ground. And this substance is like a fine white powder. It's just floating to the ground. So Sarah joins Philip in the front room, the living room. We call it the front room here in England, the living room, and witnesses this white substance just floating to the ground. And this is confusing to Sarah because she knows that her daughter and son-in-law has just moved into this house, just gone on holiday, and left the kids with her. But she knows that they've not recently done any renovations, not recently decorated. She doesn't know why this is falling to the ground, why this substance is falling to the ground. So they both head over across the road to Marie Kelly's house, who is Sarah's daughter and the kids' auntie. So while over at Marie Kelly's house, they talk about what this white substance could be, what this powder could be, and she has no idea. So they all head back to 30 East Drive across the road. So they get to the living room and they see this white substance still falling to the ground. And Marie is a bit of a clean freak, so she rushes off to the kitchen to go grab some cleaning products, a mop and a bucket, stuff like that. And as she enters the kitchen, she slips on a puddle. And as she's on the floor, just about to get up, she notices more puddles forming around her on the floor, just these liquid pools of water just forming out of the ground, all on their own. Now, I'm assuming while this is happening, she's kind of, screaming or calling for the others to come and see what's happening, because the next door neighbour, Enid, she comes around to the house because she's hearing all this commotion and she's wondering what the hell's going on, So she sees these water pools forming on the floor. She sees Marie Kelly on the floor, and everybody's just in awe. All these water puddles are forming. So, being the logical person Enid is, she goes to the water clock and turns off the water to the house, stopping everything. Then she tells Sarah to ring out the water company, which, any sensible person would have done straight away anyway. So the water company come out, and the guy knocks at the door, wants to check all the pipes and the drainage and everything like that. So he takes his time, he checks all the pipes, he checks the waterworks, and nothing is wrong. So he puts this down in his report to condensation. It's a high build-up of condensation, making all these puddles form on the floor, which is highly impossible unless you live in a greenhouse and it's really, really hot. So the water employee from the water company, he leaves the premises, and about an hour or so passes, and as soon as the water started a few hours before, it just stops completely on its own. The water stops pooling. So a few hours pass since the water stopped pooling, and it's roughly around 7 p.m. at night, or in the evening, should I say. And this is where the good stuff that I like to read about starts happening. The true elements of a real ghost story or a poltergeist activity starts. So it's 7 p.m. and Sarah Scholes is in the living room, just relaxing, watching some television, when from the kitchen she hears Philip shout, "Grandma, it's happening again!" And I'd like to apologise to anybody whose ears I've just blown out by, saying Grandma, it's happening again. I didn't mean to do it that loud. So Sarah rushes into the kitchen to see what Philip is shouting about, and as she enters the kitchen, she sees the kitchen units, the sides, the work table, the work surfaces, completely littered with sugar and dry tea leaves are just all over the place, everywhere. And she notices the automatic tea dispenser is moving in and out on its own, squirting hot water and tea all over the place. So things are happening, tea's all over the place, the sugar's all over the place, this dispenser is squirting stuff everywhere even though it's turned off and unplugged. There's tea and water everywhere, and it's all building up. All this activity is building up on Sarah, and she just breaks down and just screams, "Stop it!" And at the exact time she screams, "Stop it," from the hallway behind them is a loud crash and a bang. So this crash and this bang startle Philip and Sarah. They actually think a burglar has just broken into the house, or somebody has tried to enter their house. They walk up to the hallway door and slowly open it. All they can see is complete darkness. They was expecting to see somebody stood there who's just broken in. And all of the sudden, on its own, the hallway light just blinks on. This also scares both Philip and Sarah. They slowly make their way down the hallway towards the stairs, and they notice a potted plant that usually is at the bottom of the stairs is no longer there. It's actually been thrown into the middle of the stairs, but the main base of the plant, the pot, is actually on top of the landing, on top of the stairs, and there's soil and mud everywhere. Now, as they're looking at this plant that's been thrown everywhere, they hear another crash coming from the kitchen again, from where they just left. So they both head towards the kitchen to find out what this sound actually was. And when they reach the kitchen, they notice the cupboards, the units, are actually vibrating like somebody's trapped inside. It must be a fairly big cupboard, because they actually believe the younger daughter is inside it. Philip gains a bit of courage here. He reaches out and goes to open the cupboard. This cupboard that's vibrating on its own, shaking and making a load of noise. And as he opens it, there's nobody there whatsoever inside. It's completely empty. Now, as this is happening, Sarah notices the temperature in the house has now dropped to icy cold again. And all this activity is really, really freaking her out. So they decide to go across the road to Marie Kelly's house again, the auntie and the daughter of Sarah. So they head back over to Marie Kelly's house, and Sarah tells Marie what's going on. I think Marie's a bit of a skeptic here. I don't think she believed them, so she makes them all go back across all together, back to 30 East Drive, to a scene straight out of a ghost story, straight out of a horror movie. All the cupboards in the kitchen are now swinging back and forth, opening and closing by themselves, making loads of noise. Plates are rattling, knives and forks and spoons are rattling. Everything's going on. All this noise, all this activity is building. So Sarah decides to go next door to Mr. and Mrs. Mountain's house, the next door neighbours, and she asks them if they were making any noise, if they're banging on the walls or anything. And Mr. and Mrs. Mountain, well, Mrs. Mountain should I say, she actually thought that Sarah was the one making all the noise, making all the banging. They realised that none of them were making the noise. So they all sit around and try to discuss what's been happening all the way up to 9:30 p.m. So it's been going on for about an hour and a half now. Philip's getting tired. He's 15 years old. When I was 15, I was probably I used to say I was tired. I used to go upstairs and, watch movies or play on the games console or read a comic or whatever. So Philip decides to go upstairs to bed. As he gets to his bedroom, he notices one of his big wooden chest of drawers is actually swaying backwards and forwards and side to sides on its legs. This completely freaks Philip out. He runs down the stairs, tells his grandma, tells his aunt. They are completely freaked out. So Mr. and Mrs. Mountain offer them to stay at their house for the night, and that's what they do. Now that's the introduction to this paranormal activity that began at this house. This sudden eruption of activity that happened within the span of 24 hours. But the weird thing is, the activity kind of fell flat. 2 years after all this activity, hardly anything happened. The odd thing happened here and there. Yeah, it was relatively a peaceful time after this sudden burst of activity. As fast as it stopped, it began slowly building back up again. And this is 2 years forward from the date of August 1966. So we're now in 1968. Everybody's a couple of years older, and this activity just explodes again. It starts all over again. So the next part of this story, this case, goes all the way up until the family decide to eventually move out because of all the activity. So let's go forward 2 years to 1968 when this activity begins again. Now this is only going to be short as there's not a lot of detail of what actually happened. The Black Monk of Pontefract story is nearly over, but in future episodes, if I find more information and newer reports, then I'll do another episode about it. But yeah, let's go forward for another 2 years. It's now 1968. Philip is now 17. Diane is now 14. And this is where the entity focuses. It sets its sights on the teenage girl. Now, as things are slowly happening, the family actually give this entity a name. They begin to refer to the poltergeist or the ghost as Fred. So they've given it a name. The essence behind giving something a name means you give it power. So you are actually referring to it as a being. You are acknowledging it as a entity. So you are giving that spectral form, that ghost, that poltergeist, a earthly name. They called it Fred. As this activity is slowly ramping up throughout these 2 years, it starts to home in on Diane. The odd thing is happening here and there. Things are getting moved, people are getting touched, and Fred, it starts to drag Diane out of her bed on a regular basis. And on one occasion, things take a violent turn as the entity is seen to have grasped Diane around the neck and drag her completely up the full flight of stairs. Now, this is pretty good evidence as she did not fall down the stairs. She was not pushed. She was dragged up a flight of stairs. And as her family went to see if she was okay, they found around her neck she had red fingerprints completely covering her neck. And like I said at the beginning of this part of the recording, this is more like the horror movie kind of stuff, like in The Exorcist and other movies like The Entity and, your basic ghost stories. This is where the activity is beginning to become violent, beginning to focus on one family member. Now in the house, the activity is ramping up so much that people on the outside begin to hear the noises, the crashes, the bangs, the items being thrown and smashed against the walls and furniture being moved. So the family are getting pretty sick of this entity. They are getting scared. They can't live with it. It's becoming a nuisance. It's wrecking their lives. So they call in for a exorcism, and they have this done twice, but on both occasions it seems to just anger the spirit, anger Fred. The activity begins to ramp up more and more every time an exorcism is done. So a family member eventually comes around with a bottle of holy water, and she starts to sprinkle and douse the house in holy water. Like in The Exorcist, the power of Christ compels you and all that. Like I said, I'm not going to go into religion, but yeah, she's sprinkling this holy water, and the entity, Fred, this poltergeist, gets extremely upset, and he starts to destroy all the crucifixes in the house. Any crucifix the family own is destroyed, either broken or found charred or smashed up, And in the living room, inverted black crosses start to emerge on the walls and on the doors in this weird, sticky, gloopy like paint. And all this energy and all this activity is building up. And one night, while Jean and Joe are in bed, they awaken in like a slumber and look up. As they look up, a manifestation of this black hooded robe entity is just hovering above them menacingly. And as they stare at this thing, it slowly dissipates and eventually vanishes. Now, after this manifestation, family members of the Pritchards say that they often see, like in the corner of their eyes, a shadowy hooded figure. As they go to look at it, it will just dissipate into thin air. Now, after all this activity, after the manifestation, all the activity began to simmer down again, like it did in the first account with Sarah. It just stopped, and now the property has a new owner. The guy who made the movie When the Lights Go Out, I think he owned the house for a while. There are reports of the new neighbours, reporting activity of the house. But like I said, when I get more information on the newer happenings, the newer evidence, I might revisit this. I might revisit this case because it's highly interesting. I love stuff like this. So yeah, let me give you a little historic fact about the Black Monk. The entity Fred was named the Black Monk of Pontefract, as history records uncover detailing a crime which took place while King Henry VIII was in reign in the 16th century. A monk was reported to have raped and murdered a young girl and was sentenced to hang until dead on the gallows right next to the house in 30 East Drive. So there you have the Black Monk of Pontefract. And the next haunting tale I will tell you on a future episode of the Spectral Circle is even more insane than this. And it's one of my favourite top cases of the United Kingdom hauntings. But that's for another episode, maybe 2 or 3 episodes down the line. So yeah, there you have it, the Black Monk of Pontefract. Next I'll be talking about shadow people. But now I'll give you a quick encounter which I had when I was in my young 20s. Me and my girlfriend were actually babysitting my siblings who are younger than me. My little brother back then, he was about 2 or 3. My sister was about 11 or 12, maybe a bit younger, maybe 9. But yeah, me and my girlfriend at the time, we was babysitting, and we was just, lounging about on the sofa, doing what young lovers do, kissing and heavy petting and whatnot, and watching TV. As we were watching TV, we lived in a house where you get your living room and your middle room, and there's like a hole in the wall, where doors usually are, but ours were open. It was open plan. And as we're just watching TV, we see a white mist coming from the door that leads to the hallway to the front door. Just pass through the door, slowly pass the hole in the wall, the dividing hole where the door should be, the open plan part. Just slowly, it was really slow, slowly pass through the middle room and slowly through the wall on the opposite side. And my girlfriend at the time, she literally freaked out. She started screaming, she started saying, "What the hell was that? What the hell was that?" I was a little shocked, because her screaming got me more scared than actually seeing this mist, this form, this white apparition. And me being me, because I'm interested in all this stuff and have been since a young age, I got up to investigate. I went to go look, and as I walked into the middle room, it was icy cold. It was freezing. I was looking all over the place and I couldn't find anything, But there is a story on that street where I used to live that a misty white form just passes through all the houses down that street. The night went on. My girlfriend at the time, she calmed down, and I decided to go make a cup of tea. You know, we're English, we love to drink tea. So I went to go make a cup of tea in the kitchen, and as I was boiling the kettle and getting the cups ready, I noticed a white spectral mist, like a white mist, a fog, slowly disappearing past the kitchen window. I went to go open the back door, which was next to the kitchen. So I opened the back door, turned the back light on, and there was nothing. But yeah, that was my very first ghostly experience. I think that's the only ghostly experience I've had. Now, at the house I'm living at the moment, my housemate, he said he's seen a ghost approach the front door, tried the key, and then just disappear. Now, I've not experienced that yet, and I would love to. So yeah, there's my ghostly experience. Next, I'll be talking about shadow people, shadow beings, or shadow men, whatever you want to call them. And I will also tell you a sleep paralysis encounter I had, or episode I had, which actually includes another ex-girlfriend. You can tell where these stories are going at you. All my exes are haunted. No. Anyway, so yeah, let's get into shadow beings. So some people think shadow beings, or shadow people, or shadow men are demonic in essence. They are a black mass which can grow and which can shrink. They also have been seen to chase people or just stare at people ominously. Other people think shadow beings are dimensional creatures, you know, bordering on the line of our dimension and their dimension, crossing that tear in the fabric of the space-time continuum and the dimensional rift. A lot of people think shadow people are harbingers of death, much like the Black Shuck, which I covered on episode 1 of the Spectral Circle, which is a form of a shadow being. It is a shadow dog. There are also some people that believe that the shadow being is, of course, a military experiment, a military equipment experiment, stealth cloaking device. There are some that also believe they are an alien race coming from another planet using cloaking technology. There are also accounts of people being gang stalked by shadow entities, and the list goes on and on. So what I'm going to do in this section about shadow people, beings, or shadow men, is read you some of the encounters that I found online. Then I will tell you my sleep paralysis episode / encounter that I had back in, I think it was 2009. So here we go with the encounters that I found online. The first encounter is titled Unable to Leave. I was only about 10 or 11 when I went to this house. It was daytime and the building was well lit. I looked into a few rooms and saw nothing out of the ordinary until I turned into the hallway. It was at the other end of the hall, looking at me. Although it had no eyes, the feeling was undeniable. The shadow person and I watched each other for some time. I didn't think it was real, but then it started walking towards me slowly. I turned and ran. I looked over my shoulder and it had travelled about 7 meters in the split second I looked away. But when I had my eyes on it, it moved slowly. I got out of the house and looked again. It had stopped at the door, almost like it was unable to leave the house. It turned and walked slowly back into the house. Now, I got these encounters from various websites all over the internet. These are apparently true encounters of what people's experienced. I will not give the full name out, I'll just give the first name. So that first story was left by somebody named Courtney. So the next encounter is by somebody called Diane. This one is called A Kid's Experience. I have 2 sons who talk often about what they call the Shadow Man. The latest experience was when I had buckled them both into the car and had forgotten something in my house. I went back to go get the item. I heard my 5-year-old screaming, so I went running back out to see what was wrong. My son was in shock, screaming, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" I looked at him, puzzled, and said, "What?" Then my 6-year-old said calmly, "The Shadow Man." They both said he was standing right there on the deck. My 6-year-old says that the black and the white shadows follow my 5-year-old. They say they talk to him all of the time. Shadows talking to kids. Though kids are said to be more open to the spirit world, so it kind of would make sense. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple more of these experiences. Then I'm going to get onto my shadow person / sleep paralysis encounter that I had myself. So this next one's called Terrifying Visits. As a child of between 8 and 10, I had regular but always terrifying visits from what I described as a tall shadow of a man in a cloak and a top hat, all black, very tall. Once he was carrying a cane and once a briefcase. He spoke to me once in a loud, booming voice. He would disappear through the wall at will and return the same way. They were experiences that I will recall to friends throughout my life, and I've always described him as the Shadow Man. He has not returned since I worked up the courage to run past him out of my room. So there you have the Hat Man, a very common shadow person encounter that people have all across the world. This next one's by somebody named Cameron, and this one is very creepy indeed. It's called I Don't Know What It Is. This started happening to me about 1.5 years ago. One of my friends and I were walking to a friend's house and we were taking a shortcut. Then out of nowhere, there was a shadow figure. About as tall as me, which is about 6'3". It had a tail like a wolf and was all black. When I first started seeing it, it had eyes about the size of 2 pennies, but as time went on, they got bigger and bigger. The last time I saw it, the eyes were about the same size as a lime. Not only that, they had changed colour. What scares me the most is the fact that the last time I saw this, it was about 2 months ago. It used to show up a few times a week, and its eyes were crimson, which is the colour of hatred. I've been attacked by it before. Painful ear ringing, nausea, dizziness. It might have gone away, but I think it might be planning something. Nothing has happened yet. Just waiting for it to show up again. Then I'm going to banish it the best I can. So this story kind of reminds me of Black Shuck, like a dog-like creature, red eyes, completely shadowy, and a kind of harbinger of death, or a malicious spirit. So there you have it. There's the 4 encounters that I read out, and I'm going to get on to the sleep paralysis experience that I had. And I was seeing a girl who lived out of town. I had to get the train for about 2.5-3 hours to get to the place where she lived. She lived in a shared student house because she was going to uni at the time. So in her bedroom she had a large full-size mirror at the end of her bed, leaning against the wall just near the door. And on one night we were both asleep. I kind of woke up because I kept hearing this weird noise. So I was looking around and the room was pretty dark apart from light coming from under the door. They always kept the hallway light on. So I was looking around this bedroom and trying to figure out where this weird noise was coming. It was kind of like a metallic-y, scratchy noise. It was really, really odd. And I looked towards the mirror and I could see like a rippling, kind of wavy effect in the mirror. And as I kept looking at the mirror, I realised I couldn't move my whole body, like sleep paralysis. You can't move your body except your head. Well, I could move my head. So I was kind of arching my head towards the mirror, looking at this mirror, but I couldn't move my arms or legs. This mirror started pulling more as I noticed something was slowly coming out of it, like long black fingernails. Then attached to them fingernails was a long black arm, but you couldn't see any like separation between the nails and the arm. And as this arm came out, I saw a weird head poke through the mirror itself as well. And this thing kind of crawled out the mirror and stood up. And when it stood up, it was bigger than the mirror. This thing was about 7-8 foot. Its arms were extremely long, longer than a normal human's, and it was kind of like lumbering by its side. And you could see this thing was like it looked like a skeleton. Had like a black oily skin to it, but you could see where all the ribs should be. You could see where the mouth could be and the eye sockets, but it never had eyes or it never had a mouth or teeth. It was just really weird, long gangly arms, long skinny legs. It just stood there crouching, watching me. Then I started having a weird ringing in my ear, and that's when I started nodding off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was awake, and it was about 7:30 in the morning. Now, that's something I will never ever forget. That freaked the hell out of me. And that is one of the reasons why I never will have a mirror in my bedroom. The only mirror that I have in the house is in the bathroom. But yeah, that's the reason I hate mirrors, because I saw this long, gangly, skeletal, completely black thing crawl out of the mirror. But I am putting this down to sleep paralysis. That's what I think it was. I was dreaming while I was awake. I was asleep, but my brain function was telling me to keep my eyes open. So yeah. I don't think it was a shadow person or a demon, but yeah, it kind of relates to the stories that I'm telling today on this episode of the Spectral Circle. So that's it for this episode of the Spectral Circle. If you liked it, please share it with people. And if you want to send me a experience, an encounter, a voicemail, send them to thespectralcircle@gmail.com. Remember, voicemails must be under 10 minutes long. No swearing, no political talk, and refrain from talking too much religion. I will allow a little bit of religion, but just don't go crazy about it. Also, this is available on iTunes, so if you listen via iTunes, remember to give me some stars, give me some criticism, some reviews. It's also available on YouTube, so if you go to YouTube, just type in the Spectral Circle Podcast and subscribe to the channel. And it's also available on Stitcher Radio. The next episode of the Spectral Circle will be about urban legends of the United Kingdom, so we will be talking about things like Spring-Heeled Jack and stuff like that. So that is me, Mike, saying goodbye, and the circle is now closed.